I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 103 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, June the 6th, 2024. The committee is commencing its study of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. Before we begin, I would ask all in-person participants to read the guidelines written on the update cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. You will also notice a QR code on the card which links to a short awareness video. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. All witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. I would like to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can. I would also like to welcome Amy Belmore, analyst replacing Sarah Dodsworth. Welcome. I also will be using these two cards. This is yellow, 30-second warning, and a red is time's up. And I'll try not to interrupt you mid-sentence. Now I would like to welcome our witnesses with us for the first hour today. Environmental Defence Canada, Julia Levin, Senior Climate and Energy Program Manager by video conference. From the Office of the Parliamentary Budget Officer, Yves Giroux, Parliamentary Budget Officer, and Jason Stanton, Advisor and Analyst. Up to 5 minutes will be given for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions.
Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Angus, on a point of order.
It's a two-parter. Part A is it's really great to see you back in your chair. But part B is my understanding on our agreement was that we are going to have Pathways Alliance and CAP at our first meeting, and they aren't here. Is there a reason that they are not here?
My understanding was speaking with the clerk, both those organizations have been invited and they could not attend today. I can ask the clerk to provide further guidance if you wish.
Well, there's a difference between not being able to make this meeting and not coming. So if you could clarify, are they not interested or are they just busy? Which is, I don't have a problem if they can't make the meeting, but if they're not wanting to come, that's a different scenario.
Same item?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Ms. Stubbs. Thank you, Mr. Angus. We'll just address your point of order once Ms. Stubbs is done with hers. Go ahead, Ms. Stubbs.
Thanks, Chair. Just want to support MP Angus's request for clarification. Certainly, given that among the five most profitable producers and foreign-based multinational oil and gas companies are asking for significant taxpayers' investment in a proposal in Northeast Alberta. It seems, and given the challenges in the local communities and perspectives there, the impact it will have on the region and the area, and of course its implications for the entire country, it seems totally reasonable to me that MP Angus is asking for this clarification, so I just support his request.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk, can you provide some additional guidance on your correspondence with the organizations?
So in my last exchange with CAP, it wasn't clear if they're declining the invitation for the whole study. I'm awaiting on confirmation. And as for Pathways Alliance, they have declined to appear for the study.
Go ahead, Mr. Angus.
Well, I think we work on the principle of reasonableness here. So perhaps you could request they reconsider that before we have to bring a motion instructing them to appear. I think it would not look good if they were brought forward as reluctant witnesses. So maybe you could advise them. It would be very helpful to participate in the public interest.
Thank you. Mr. Angus, for that, and I think the clerk has acknowledged what you've just stated, and we will endeavor to connect with them to let them know that we hope they can appear, and we will provide any updates at future meetings. I think we can deal with that. Oh, sorry, Ms. DeBrusen, go ahead.
I think it would be important to get clarity from CAP as to whether it's a refusal to attend at all or whether it was just this meeting. I agree with MP Angus on that point. There's a real difference between being available on a specific date and a refusal to participate in a study. And I would also suggest that we should circle back with Pathways to confirm that they are actually refusing to participate in the study at all so that we can consider our next steps.
Thank you, Ms. DeBrusen, and we will provide further feedback to committee members as soon as possible. All right, we'll now begin with our opening remarks, and we will begin with Julia Levin for 5 minutes from Environmental Defence Canada. Ms. Levin, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the entire committee for the invitation to appear before you as part of this study on Trans Mountain Expansion Project. I've worked at Environmental Defence for the last 5 years and have been tracking the TMX project over this time. My comments will touch on the climate and environmental impacts of the project, the amount of public financial support that has already been wasted, with more at stake, the importance of not offloading this project onto, and all of its financial risks, onto Indigenous communities, as well as the connection to petrochemical and plastic production in China. The expanded Trans Mountain pipeline has the potential to deliver an additional 590,000 barrels of oil per day. Each barrel of oil we export through TMX results in additional carbon in the atmosphere that is contributing to the unnatural wildfires, floods, and droughts being experienced by so many across Canada, including the fire that burned down much of Jasper. Producing and burning 600,000 barrels of oil would result in 84 million tons of carbon dioxide each year. That's the equivalent of driving around 20 million cars, running 22 coal plants. It's more than the yearly emissions of Quebec. According to the Government of Canada's own social cost of carbon calculations, which calculates all of the costs of carbon pollution, such as costs on healthcare, property damage, and decreased agricultural productivity, the cost of that much carbon pollution would be over $20 billion a year. The TMX expansion has already led to an increase in oil production in Alberta. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has been very clear that even existing levels of fossil fuel production will cause us to exceed 1.5 degrees of warming, beyond which we know the impacts of the climate crisis will become catastrophic and irreversible. Growing production of fossil fuels in a climate crisis is irresponsible to present and future generations. That increased production also comes with environmental and social impacts, including the clearing of the boreal forest, the infringement of Indigenous treaty and inherent rights, and increased health risks to First Nations downstream of that production, something the federal government has recently recognized with its new study into those health impacts. On the West Coast, Vancouver tanker traffic has risen tenfold since export started, putting endangered orca whales at risk of extinction and impacting salmon levels, which First Nations communities in the area rely on. Spills, which are all too often occurrences with current pipelines, would endanger local sources of drinking water along the route and waters along the coast. I'd like to note the link between the pipeline and plastic production in China, which contributes to global overproduction of this dangerous pollutant that is filling our oceans, air, water, and food sources in human bodies. In fact, a substantial amount of the oil exported to date has been bought by Rongsheng Petrochemical for plastics production. And of course, there are the financial implications. This project has involved a huge amount of public money, an enormous fossil fuel subsidy. The federal government has provided over $35 billion in financing for TMX. That's money that taxpayers are on the hook for. The government could end up writing off most of the debt to make the pipeline appear commercially viable, which means taxpayers will have paid for the lion's share of the pipeline. In fact, according to analysis by TD Securities in 2018, The expansion project ceased to be viable when project cost exceeded $11 billion, and now they're 3 times that. Even if the Canadian government finds a buyer for the pipeline, it will not receive a price that covers the project costs. Current estimates are that the government would need to write off around 17 to 20 billion. An eventual sale rests in part on the decisions around tolls, the amount the shippers are paying to use the pipeline, which are currently set at a rate below the marketplace costs of transporting the oil, given they were based on earlier and much lower construction estimates. Given how much the cost of building and operating the pipeline has ballooned, the tolls need to rise significantly to cover the project's full operating and capital costs. However, oil and gas companies are fighting tooth and nail against increased tolls. They don't want to pay more, they want taxpayers to pay. A decision will be made in 2025 with massive impacts on the financials of the project. Oil companies, not taxpayers, should be paying for the pipeline that they will be the only beneficiaries from. This means the toll rate should be roughly doubled to $22 a barrel. Every penny oil and gas companies reduce the tolls by will be paid for by the Canadian public. The reason that this boondoggle has gone ahead, for fossil fuel companies to get a higher price for their product. So to line the pockets of already incredibly wealthy oil executives. CNRL, Cenovus, Imperial, Suncor, Meg Energy, they are the only winners, while the rest of us pay the price. Many of these companies are members of both the Pathways Alliance and CAP, underlining the necessity of having both of these associations testify before this committee. As a final note, it is very important that this project is not downloaded onto Indigenous communities in the name of so-called economic reconciliation. 2 more seconds. TMX has massive environmental and financial liabilities, as we've explored. Furthermore, given the accelerating pace of the energy transition, this project is likely to become a stranded asset well before the end of its life. Shifting these liabilities from the public or private sectors to Indigenous communities is just another form of colonial exploitation. And now I'm done, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you for your opening remarks. I will now move to Mr. Giroux from the Parliamentary Budget Officer for 5 minutes.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Good day, Mr. Chair, Vice Chairs and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to appear before you today. We are pleased to be here as part of your study on the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, specifically to discuss our reports published on this topic. And with me today, I have Jason Stanton, who's advisor and analyst. Consistent with the Parliamentary Budget Officer's mandate, the PBO's mandate, to provide independent, non-partisan analysis to Parliament, my office has released 3 reports assessing the Government of Canada's 2018 decision to acquire, expand, operate, and eventually one day divest of the Trans Mountain Pipeline system. The most recent report was published on June 22nd, 2022, which provided an updated financial valuation of the purchased assets, as well as estimates to the valuation sensitivity to several key factors. At the time of publication of the last report in 2022, the construction budget for the Trans Mountain expansion project came to $21.4 billion, with an anticipated completion date in late 2023. Our assessment was limited to examining the direct financial cost of the pipeline expansion. Any other economic costs or benefits associated with the pipeline were not included in this analysis. I'll now switch to English.
Based on our assumptions at that time, we found that the government's 2018 decision to acquire, expand, operate, and eventually divest of the Trans Mountain assets would result in a negative net present value of $0.6 billion. We also conducted sensitivity analysis to illustrate how the value of the Trans Mountain Pipeline system would be impacted by changes to certain key assumptions, including in-service date, construction costs, pipeline utilization, future service and tolling frameworks, and discount rate. Since we published our last report, there have been significant developments to the Trans Mountain Pipeline system, notably the completion of the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline with a commercial commencement date of May 1st, 2024, and total costs for the expansion project have increased to over $34 billion. At a request of this committee, we have undertaken work to update our analysis. In June, we sent an information request to the Minister of Finance to obtain the most recent comprehensive data available for the Trans Mountain Pipeline system. We did receive all the requested information, although it is confidential for commercial reasons. We are currently working on the analysis and plan to release our report late next month. Jason and I would be pleased to respond to any questions you may have regarding our analysis of the Trans Mountain Pipeline System or other PBO work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your opening remarks. We will now proceed to our first round of questions, and we will begin with Ms. Stubbs for 6 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. And it is a pleasure to be back with you as we start this session, and look forward to asking the House of Commons to vote non-confidence in this government so that Canadians can rescue our country, bring home affordable power and fuel home heating for Canadians in safe communities after a carbon tax election. Thank you, Monsieur Giroux and Mr. Stanton, for your presence here today. It's a little bit like Groundhog a Day as a person who's been elected since 2015 and has worked in many ways on this particular issue. To be clear, Conservatives always opposed the government purchase of the Trans Mountain expansion. Our view was that the federal government had to give legal and political certainty for the private sector proponent to be able to complete its federally approved project in federal jurisdiction on budget and on time, which, as you know, would have been 340% less and in service by 2019. This is yet another example, perhaps the most important example of the destruction and damage to the Canadian economy and confidence in Canada as a place to get big projects built after 9 years of the anti-energy NDP Liberal government. Comments on which, of course, I think you probably couldn't comment. So given the extensive work that you have aimed to do, could I just ask you right off the bat if you'll be willing to come back to this committee after you table your next report?
It would be a pleasure if the committee wishes to hear us again.
Thank you. For more just to get a sense of your comprehensive analysis. Can you outline what your estimate were as to the causes of the drastic, unconscionable, and outrageous increases in costs that ballooned to over 6 times of the government's initial estimate?
I'll ask Jason if he has more specific information on the causes of the construction cost increase.
I think in terms of like the specific breakdown and the reasons as well as the dollar values associated with those increases, it would be best placed with the Crown Corporation. Based on kind of some of the public statements, I know that the pandemic was cited. There was other reasons for extreme weather events during the construction time. But in terms of the specific breakdown of why the construction costs have increased and the dollar values associated with that, it would be a better place to ask them.
Okay.
As we kind of take the construction costs that are provided and not necessarily kind of factor in why those have increased as part of our analysis.
Thank you. So we'll follow up with the proponent to try to get some accountability to Canadian taxpayers for this boondoggle caused by Prime Minister Trudeau and these Liberals. Because, of course, they put at risk the already approved Trans Mountain expansion when they delayed that review. Dithard forced them to go through a review again, green-lighted, and then had a court decision give basically the same analysis on their failure of their Indigenous consultation as was given in Northern Gateway pipeline. They unilaterally vetoed, the Prime Minister did himself. So would it be safe to say that the costs would have been lower given government-caused inflation and the escalating costs of essentials, energy, and the components of construction? Would it be safe to say that the private sector proponent likely would have committed this project with much less expense to taxpayers because the private sector was making that investment and that risk?
It's hard to say the extent to which that would have happened in the absence of a counterfactual scenario and in the absence of clear and thorough explanations as to why the costs increased by that factor. So one can presume that a private sector entity would have proceeded differently, but it's very hard to determine with certainty.
And so is it the case that you have the Trans Mountain Expansion Crown Corporation has given your office the details that you know to make that comprehensive analysis? You just can't disclose them, and it's our duty to get that from the Crown Corporation.
So we have the data, the financial data that allows us to determine whether it will be the net present value of future cash flows, taking into account construction costs so far. So we have that. Some of it is commercially sensitive, so we can't disclose the details. What we don't have is the detailed breakdown of the construction costs and the reasons for the change in construction costs versus the 2018 estimates, the 2020 estimates, and the 2022 estimates.
Okay. Is it fair to say that it will be very unlikely that if the government does finally keep its commitment to Canada and divest this pipeline, which, by the way, at least a minimum of 3 Indigenous-led groups are interested in purchasing, despite the testimony earlier, would it be fair to say that it is very unlikely that the government is actually going to be able to recoup the costs that it has wasted to get a pipeline constructed that's now full, and actually won't fully capture the value of Canadian energy exports for our economy and for every community in this country? Is it fair to say that the government is not going to be able to make taxpayers whole with the divestiture if that ever actually happens?
Well, based on our 2022 analysis, we found that the net present value was negative of the pipeline, and that was when construction costs were at $20 billion, slightly more than that. So with construction costs having increased to $34 billion, we still have to complete the analysis, but it suggests that, as Madame Levin indicated in her opening remarks, tolls will have to increase, or the sale value will have to be less than the construction costs and the net present value of future revenues.
Thank you, Mr. Giroux. Thank you, Ms. Tubbs. Your time's up. We'll now proceed to Mr. Jouari for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Giroux, welcome to our committee. It's good to see you, and it's good to start this session with you as a witness, getting some insight into the TMX. First of all, thank you very much for the report that you did in 2022. I think it established a good mid-baseline before we get the final report, where all the information is available. And I'm personally looking forward to reading your report. I believe will be very comprehensive in that. I want to go back to the 2022 report. And you qualified that in your opening remarks, but a number of times you talk about assumptions. My understanding is you use 5 key assumptions to measure the value of the pipeline project. Can you kindly elaborate on those 5 key assumptions?
Sure. So we look at, first, we have a reference scenario. The other assumptions are an increase or decrease in construction costs. We also have assumptions regarding the pipeline utilization rate, lower or higher utilization rates. We also have a discount rate that varies, lower or higher, and the service and tolling framework after 10-year contracts expire. So these are the main assumptions that we use to determine how the value of the pipeline could vary according to variations in these various parameters.
So on those specific, and I do acknowledge that you said, hey, look, after the completion, now there's more variables that you're going to look at, and I'll come to that. But going back on those 5 assumptions, how many of them have proven to be aligned with the project as you know it now, and how many of them has changed? Aside from the cost, we know the cost went from 7.5 to 35. Yeah. So aside from those, the other 4.
The exact opposite of funny.
The in-service date has been postponed by several months. The construction costs, as you've alluded to, have increased significantly. The rest, I don't think, have changed significantly. The discount rate has gone down, as you would expect with a construction project that has some uncertainties, And as these uncertainties are, we get rid of these as the construction is finalized, then the discount rate has gone down. Pipeline utilization rates and the service and tolling frameworks after the 20-year contracts expire, I don't think have changed significantly at this stage yet.
Not too bad. Three seems to be, so you're doing a good job on coming up with the assumptions for your calculation. Would you consider the same assumptions, or would you expand your assumption base when you're going to look at the new valuation, as well as the divestment, which I'll get to in your upcoming report? So will you keep the assumptions to 5, or will you increase it? And if you're going to increase it, what assumptions would you add?
Well, we will certainly remove the in-service date because the pipeline is currently in service. So there is no need, I think, to vary the in-service date. But we are still in the process of determining which other factors we will be using. Construction costs have also probably are a given unless there are changes, and Jason is not kicking me under the table, so that seems to be okay. The rest are probably going to remain as the assumptions that could change.
Okay, so will you look into, for example, economic benefit from this revenue, the jobs that they were created, the downstream jobs they created, the increased factor, and other expert testimonies into your assessment? So are we going to go from, we are dropping 2 of the 5, so 3 is going to remain, and then you're adding how many more? 5 more, 6 more, 1 more?
Well, we have looked in the past at the economic impacts of the construction phase, so the thousands of jobs that have been created and their impact on GDP during the construction phase. We have also indicated potential benefits with respect to a narrowing of the gap between Western Canada Select and WTI. And that we mentioned that every $5 of narrowing the gap between Canadian oil and oil on the world markets at that time was $6 billion. So we will...
Sorry, that's exactly where I wanted to go. So before, what was the gap? The gap was about $15, I understand?
Well, the gap varies significantly based on world market conditions.
Yeah.
But we assumed, or we indicated for illustrative purposes, that if the gap between WCS and WTI goes down by $5, it was, at the time, from 2019 to 2023, a $6 billion annual benefit to the Canadian economy. If Canadian oil producers can sell their oil less cheaply or at a significant lower discount, so they can get a better price for their commodity, then there is a benefit of about $6 billion per year.
So if we're selling, because we couldn't sell our oil internationally, if you're selling it down south, and we're hit with a $15 per barrel or discount, which we had to do with this. Now, not only we maximized, but also we've kind of recovered $15 billion. That's a 3-factor times $6 billion, and now we are talking about $18 billion. Correct?
It depends on your assumption. So
Yeah.
we didn't imply that the completion of the pipeline would necessarily reduce that discount by $5. It was just for illustrative purposes. Because
I'm over
other
6
factors.
minutes, so thank you very much for your indulgence, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll now proceed to Monsieur Simard for 6 minutes. Monsieur Simard, the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for being here today, Mr. Giroux. I'll start by placing all this in context. In 2018, the government bought the pipeline for $4.5 billion, and the Kinder Morgan analysis back then about the expansion was $7.4 billion. And then in 2020, the estimate was $12.6 billion. For the value of the expansion in 2022, it was $21.4 billion. In 2023, it went up to $34 billion. And the final cost is now estimated at $34 billion in 2024. You came before this committee, and in the past, you already said that probably this scenario that was presented by the government might need to be put aside, namely the profits would be invested in clean energy projects. I would like to point out something quite simple. The government, in its 2023 budget, presented a bold plan for the energy transition, and they talked about 40 billion for this big, bold plan up to 2035. And with this 40 billion, there's not just clean electricity involved, but there's also capture and storage carbon sequestration projects that are to help the oil and gas sector. If I look at that from the outside in, it would lead me to the conclusion, because you've put a price on this in your analysis on carbon, so I'm obliged to draw the conclusion that the government has ploughed many, many resources into fossil fuel projects. And on the other hand, for clean energy projects, I have the impression that we're going to miss the target. Do you think my analysis makes sense? Is it coherent? Yes, I think it is quite coherent. We've bought a pipeline on the one hand, and we've contributed or continued with this adventure by building an expansion to this pipeline for total cost that will probably exceed $34 billion. And the various tax credits that have been announced in recent budgets are going to come to several tens of billions of dollars. I don't have the exact figures on that, but it seems that we're talking about roughly the same amounts. The only nuance that I'd like to mention with this analysis is as follows. The government could decide to sell the Trans Mountain pipeline and its expansion, and it would probably collect the fruits of this sale. And will they actually then exceed the cost of acquisition of the pipeline expansion or not? We think they'll probably be lower, so there will be a loss case here. But the cost of the expansion and the purchase of the expansion has also to be considered when we look at the profits derived from the sale, if ever this is sold. Well, it's very interesting what you're saying, says Mr. Simard. If you look at possible scenarios, you've said there's one possible scenario where there's a sale. There's one that we can leave aside right away, namely, there will never be any more investment in the operating of Trans Mountain that will be carried out to support clean energy projects. Do you think we can actually push aside this scenario at the outset? Well, I wouldn't quickly arrive at that conclusion because it is very possible that there will be annual profits generated, given that the tools for using the pipeline are regulated in such a way that there needs to be a certain return back to investors. So as Ms. Levin said in her opening remarks, the tolls are regulated and have to be reviewed over the next few years to ensure that there is a certain minimal return generated. So it's quite probable there will be profits generated by the operating of the pipeline on an annual basis. But what we're seeing is that the sale value will probably not fully reimburse the government for the price of the purchase and the expansion, but it's possible that in the intermediate phase there will be certain profits generated on an annual basis. So just to continue with that quickly, if I recall correctly, in your update in 2022, I believe that amongst the profits that would be reinvested for clean energy projects, I think that you arrived at a negative number, that there would not be any profits that would be reinvested. And back then, we were talking about 21.4 billion. If we've now gone up to 34 billion, I don't know how the tolls are going to be carried out. But for me, having profits that will be reinvested in clean energy projects seems to be quite improbable. Well, what we're discussing here, in fact, is the difference between the profits over the whole life of the project compared to the annual profits that could be generated. But once we look at the purchase price and the cost of the expansion, we look at the net present value of all of these future cash flows, it's quite improbable that this will generate profits if we look at it over the whole cycle of the project. So it's quite improbable that there won't be profits generated, and so it's quite improbable that this would then be invested in clean energy projects. So now turning to the sale of the pipeline. We've heard about possible partnerships with First Nations, But otherwise, if we look at the value of the project as a whole, do you think there is someone who could actually absorb these costs? Well, it's difficult to determine with certainty that yes or no, it's possible. It is possible, yes. Is it probable? I think no. So we can perhaps actually push aside that scenario as well of possible profitability. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smart. We'll now proceed to Mr. Angus for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. So when you did your first report, I think the cost to taxpayers was under 21 billion. It's over 34 billion now. Have you started to model out the kind of scenarios that would be required for us to get that money back?
We have not modeled that because that could happen under various scenarios. Greater utilization of the pipeline would be probably difficult. Higher tolling for the, yes, higher tolls.
Higher tolls?
We are undertaking that analysis,
Excellent.
so it's something that we will be looking at.
Thank you. So I'm trying to get a sense of the finances here because the Liberal government has really done a great job of hiding from the public and lying about what they are giving to the oil industry. So TMC, if they publish their financial quarterly reports, they're profitable. But then there's the other TM Financial Corporation. That's kind of a black box. Are you aware of the finances of the TM Financial and what their debt holdings are?
So I know kind of the financing initially pre-2022, how TMP finance would work is that it received the loan through the government via the Canada account at 100% debt, and then that was financed to TMC at a debt to equity ratio. Since 2022, TMC itself has is now able to kind of borrow from the syndicate of banks which are now providing loans. I don't have all the information in terms of kind of what's currently on TMP's balance sheet, but that's kind of they were used initially to kind of finance TMC, but now TMC is able to kind of get the loans.
There's a 2018 report to Parliament that says TMP Financial is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Canada Development Investment Corporation and has no employees. The day-to-day operations are administered by CDEV employees in Toronto, Ontario. And it says that their corporate structure is debt, 100% debt. So will you ask TMP Financial to turn over the debt so we have a sense of what they're holding or keeping from the public?
Well, I'm not sure that there is that much that's being kept secret in a sense because the structure is a bit layered, but from my understanding is that we've got all the information we needed.
Okay,
Yes.
good. Because under Section 23(6) of the Export Development Act, all or part of the debt obligations owned by TMP financed to the Canada account can be forgiven through ministerial direction. So it seems like they set up this shell company to hide the costs, and then they can just write it off. I mean, I'm feeling like I'm in Kazakhstan or Venezuela or something when dealing with Chrysler Friedland's commitment to the tar sands.
Well, I agree with you that the structure seems to be, as I said, I used the adjective layered, and there seems to be a lot of corporate structures under CDEV, whereas CDEV probably could have done that directly rather than setting up different subsidiaries.
What would the advantage be of setting up a shell corporation that has no employees, whose only role is to hold all your debt and keep it off the books of Trans Mountain Corporation? Doesn't that seem kind of shady and shifty? Again, like, is this Petrostate Economics 101 with Chrysler Friedland?
I have no idea why it was established that way because CDEV is non-taxable and its subsidiaries are probably non-taxable. So I don't see the benefits of establishing additional corporations just for the purpose of holding one asset. Maybe it's to facilitate the eventual sale of the asset, but that's not something that we were told or that was made obvious to us? That would be a good question for the minister.
And will you look in and when you do your modeling? Because that's
We can
that's
certainly
a
we can
real
ask.
question. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we can ask.
I guess the other question I have in terms of this issue, and we've heard from our Liberal friends this morning about the economic benefits of the Canadian people spending $34 billion to vastly increase oil production at this time. We have the International Energy Agency saying that we're hitting peak oil and we're facing a climate crisis and we're going to deal with shifting assets. We see the UN panel saying that we have to seriously diminish and change and transform. And yet, what the Liberal government done has committed to a massive increase. We're seeing 500,000 to 800,000 barrels a day. We've seen record oil production now in a time when the market is soft. So when you do your factoring in on cost-benefit analysis, would you be looking at the economics that are out there of climate catastrophe from how much of that new emissions will be coming on stream in the next few years?
So we don't do that directly, but in our financial analysis of Trans Mountain, the project and the expansion, we also have sensitivity analysis that shows what will the impact be of the viability of the pipeline if the use of the pipeline, its utilization rate goes down, which is something that could very well happen in attaining or reaching Canada's commitment to get to net zero, or in a scenario where oil demand decreases significantly.
If there was an emissions cap, certainly, but what we've seen is a massive increase, and Imperial says it's the biggest amount of production ever. Cenovus is looking to massively increase. Husky's increasing. This is all due to the subsidy that was given to them by the Trudeau government. So it looks like they're going all in on increasing. So will you factor in the potential environmental impacts of them?
Thank you,
going all
Mr.
in?
Angus, for your question. The time is up, so maybe in the next round
Thank
we
you.
can get that. We will now go to Ms. Stubbs for the next round for 5 minutes. I believe you're sharing with Mr. Falk, so I'll begin with you.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick question before I speak to my colleague. I just want to also mention that I find the line of questioning posed by MP Angus to be extremely important. So we'll do our work to get accountability for these answers too. Mr. Giroux and Mr. Stanton, 3 months ago, the Auditor General, you probably saw, said that the government issued a non-competitive contract in October 2022 without a justification clearly linked to one of the exceptions to competitive procurements. That contract was worth nearly $33 million. It is related to the Trans Mountain expansion. It was given to, as these Liberals love to do, their insider cronies and buddies at McKinsey, McKinsey and Company. I have a question for you. Are you familiar with that information, and would you be willing to also review and analyze and pursue that information that the Auditor General has highlighted, given all of your yeoman's work in your office to support Parliament by, exactly as you always emphasize, promoting greater budget transparency and accountability?
It's not something that we have looked at. We take the construction costs as a given, and we adjust for future, in our past reports at least, for future potential increases or decrease to construction costs. So we're not typically mandated to do audits of the costs that have been incurred, whether each and every one of them was justified. We take them as granted. And I think
about is that this $33 million contract that the Auditor General highlighted that was non-competitive and is somehow linked to TMX, and this government hasn't actually given any answers to taxpayers who now, because of them, are on the hook for TMX and also on the hook for whatever this $33 million contract, uncompetitive contract was given to McKinsey and Company for whatever this mysterious work is done for TMX. So it looks like the Auditor General did the work that they could. And so I would love to be able to figure out ways to work with you in your office to get you to do a deep dive on whatever the heck that issue is to get these needed answers for Canadians.
that would be work that would typically be done by the Auditor General. But if the committee were to pass a motion asking me to look specifically into this issue, it's something that I could do in conjunction with the Auditor General.
Thank you very much. And I'll see to my colleague, Ted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Giroux and Mr. Stanton, for your presence here today. You said you've reviewed this project at several stages at the time of purchase and then in 2022 and now again. And you looked at project costs and budgets and estimates. Can you provide this committee with a detailed construction breakdown from the initial costs and then as compared to what the actual costs were now at the time of completion?
So we have the construction costs in aggregate. So early, when the project was in its early phases, the estimates, and as these estimates evolved upwards, we have the overall amount, but we did not request the amount of details that would allow us to determine whether each and every one of them was justified or the reason why each and every one was. Okay.
Patients are, what I'm asking for is actual amounts. You will have had a detailed construction given to you, a breakdown at the beginning of the project, and I'd like a comparison now on a completed project as to what those costs ended up being and any additional costs associated with the project. Those you would have had. I'm not asking for justification or explanation. I just want numbers. And you did mention that the government was going to divest some of the assets it purchased with TMX. Has the government divested of any of the assets associated with that project?
To my knowledge, no. No.
No. Okay, and when you do an evaluation of the project, if you were to look at that project on an income basis, based on the revenue or the tolls that the project is currently generating at today's interest rates, if one were to finance the entire project with a 1.1% debt service ratio, what would the value of the project be today?
We haven't done that analysis. We'd have to run these specific numbers to be able to answer that specific question.
Okay. When you look at the project, you say you have done a evaluation of the project. On what basis or rationale have you used to determine that value?
Sorry, again, could you just repeat the question?
Okay, you've indicated that you've
Mr. Falk, unfortunately, the time's up, and so we'll have to hold
well,
that.
he's asking for clarification to answer the question.
Time is up, so we're going
I think Mr.
to,
Johari
maybe
got-
somebody else can pick up
got an
with that
extension.
line of questioning. Thank you. We'll now go to Ms. Jones for 5 minutes.
Dipstick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank our witnesses that are here today. I have a couple of questions for Ms. Levin. I'll start there and then go to Mr. Grew if I have time. First of all, Ms. Levin, obviously we have been using carbon price as a tool to fight against climate change. I'd like to know what your position is on carbon pricing.
Yeah, sure. So Canada has kind of two carbon prices: the industrial carbon price and the retail carbon price. The support behind this policy, economists around the world do agree this is the most cost-effective way to reduce emissions. A recent report from the Canada Climate Institute found that the industrial carbon price is doing really the lion's share of emissions reductions in Canada across like a suite of policies. And retail carbon pricing is also playing a smaller but significant role in reducing emissions. I'd say we're in a climate crisis and we should be using every tool in our toolkit to fight the climate crisis, but also while also ensuring affordability for Canadians.
You're probably aware that recently the NDP sided with the Conservatives to announce that they would end carbon pricing. Do you think this is a responsible thing to do in Canada when we know the situation that exists with climate change today?
I can't comment on the details of the NDP's climate plan. I didn't actually listen to the press conference in detail, and so don't know exactly what was said, only know what was reported on. I think every political party in Canada has to be doing everything in their toolkit to fight the climate crisis.
I don't think there is a plan. I'm not aware of it either. My next question is for Mr. Guru. Our cap on emissions in the oil and gas sector and the carbon price play has been critical to us in reducing the country's emissions. When will the PBO table their report on carbon pricing? I know you've been working on it.
We have said that we plan on releasing that by the end of this calendar year, but I think we can be a bit more precise now. By early November, it should be out. I'm hoping it will be before that, but with what we have on our work plan, I can optimistically say it's going to be before the end of the calendar year and hopefully by early November.
Can you speak to your analysis on low-income and middle-income Canadians? For us, we're seeing that they're benefiting mostly from the carbon price and the carbon price rebates. And can you also tell us if your study is actually finding that 8 out of 10 Canadians are getting more money back than they're paying out in carbon pricing?
Point of order, Chair.
We have a point of order from Mr. Patzer.
Just want to remind members which study that we were on here. We're studying the Trans Mountain expansion project, and maybe we could stick to that topic. That'd be helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer, for a point of order. I'll go back to Ms. Jones. Ms. Jones, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask Mr. Grew to answer that question, please.
So when we released our initial reports, the multiple reports, and looking at the carbon tax paid versus the Canada carbon rebate paid to individuals, we found that it is indeed for the lower and the second quintile. Generally speaking, these quintiles receive more, income quintiles receive more in terms of rebate than what they pay directly and indirectly in carbon tax. And that will not change based on, with our revised report. The numbers that could change, and we have not finished the analysis yet, are the ones when we also include the economic impact of the fuel charge on incomes of these different income quintiles.
My next question is on the value of the Trans Mountain pipeline. In your analysis of cost and what the government is investing and have invested to complete the project, are you also looking at the outcomes of that project? What the value of it is to Canadians, the jobs that's being created, the return on investment, where real value is attached to this? Will we be seeing that in your analysis that you're working on right now?
So we haven't done a cost-benefit analysis overall. However, we mentioned in previous reports and testimonies to House and Senate committees that there are factors beyond just the numbers and the value of the Trans Mountain pipeline that justified or could be used to justify the decision to purchase such an asset. For example, a better price for the commodity on world markets by the producer through a better or additional means to get their products to Tidewater, as is often said.
Thank you, Mr. Giroux. Thank you, Ms. Jones, for your line of questioning. We'll now go to Mr. Simard for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur Giroux, j'aime.
Thank you, Mr. Giroux. I'd like you to shed light on something for me. How can we talk about government's action vis-à-vis the pipeline, and you'll understand, because there's a great deal of support for the oil and gas sector within the federal government, and we find it hard to draw a distinction between the efficient subsidies and the inefficient subsidies. I think the government doesn't even manage to define what's efficient or inefficient in terms of subsidies to this sector. But when I look at the purchase of the pipeline and the frightening cost, the infamous $34 billion related to this, it really seems that apparently it's an essential infrastructure for the oil and gas sector. It's essential infrastructure, and Kinder Morgan didn't want to invest in this because they probably deemed that it wasn't going to be profitable for them. So when we put all of these parts of the puzzle together, could we draw the conclusion that the $34 billion is actually a form of support to the oil and gas sector? Do you agree with that? I think that even the government has indicated that, in fact, that there was a way for the government to support the oil industry. So it would be difficult to say something to the contrary. Excellent. Do you think it would be possible in your report, if it's not too complicated, to perhaps add in another element where in a table you could present us all of the support that is given to the oil and gas sector? Would it be feasible for you to do that? I think we did carry out analysis several months or years ago about the value of certain fiscal incentives for the oil and gas sector, fiscal incentives that are available mainly or sometimes exclusively, in fact, for the oil and gas sector. So I'd be rather reluctant, however, to add these elements into this report, which is to shed light for parliamentarians on a specific subject. We could do a reading of that in parallel, but adding in these elements here, well, we could refer to previous analyses if you wish, but mixing things up like that is something that I don't really like to do. But I'm always available, of course, and open to listen to the recommendations and preferences of MPs. And another quick question to Madam. Oh, okay.
Now we will go to Mr. Angus for the last 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. I'd like to get a response from Madame Levin. It seems that the Liberal government's climate plan is kind of like the drinking your way to sobriety school. They invested $34 billion in massively increasing oil production while saying somehow they were going to magically lower emissions. The Canadian Energy Regulator report showed that under the way the Liberal government plan was, we basically producing the same amount of oil in 2050 as today. So then Minister Wilkinson got upset and made them rewrite it. So then they came in with a lower number with the so-called unicorn and rainbow scenario, which included a several thousand-fold increase in direct air carbon capture. I had to look up direct air carbon capture. It was first identified 25 years ago, and it's never been used. But, several thousand increase. But what we have in the real world is massive increases now, thanks to TMX, in the Alberta tar sands. So, Ms. Levin, what are the impacts of that massive increase, and what will it mean for this?
Mr. Angus, if I could just ask you to hold 1 sec. We have a point of order from Ms. Stubbs. Ms. Stubbs?
Just a quick point of science and facts. There's no tar in the oil sands.
Okay. I'm going to go back to you, Mr. Angus, because that's...
Well, there never was a saber-toothed tiger that got stuck in and found in oil sands, but we'll continue. Madame Levin, could you explain what you think the impact of this massive increase in emissions from 500 to 800,000 barrels a day will mean, not just for the environment, but for the credibility of a emissions cap?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. The entire life cycle emissions from that many barrels of oil, if they're all combusted, that is 84 million tons each year. Again, that is an enormous amount of emissions. It's more than the yearly emissions of Quebec from one project. Those are the emissions from the oil that's exported when it's burned. But the upstream emissions from producing that expanded oil production will also be significant. I don't have the exact numbers here, but certainly if Canada's emissions cap is to have rigor, there is no room for expanded production. And we know that the technologies that companies are often touting, including direct air capture and carbon capture and storage, are proven to be ineffective, expensive failure after expensive failure. They're dangerous for communities. There was a leak at an injection well in the United States, in the first permanent storage injection well just last week, which threatened drinking water. That is the reality of carbon capture projects.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. Thank you to our witnesses today for attending. Colleagues, we'll now suspend for a few minutes as we set up our next panel. So we're suspended. Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, June the 6th, 2024. The committee is commencing a study of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. I would now like to welcome our witnesses for the second hour. From the Canada Energy Regulator, Tracy Sleto, Chief Executive Officer, Genevieve Carr, Executive Vice President, Transparency and Strategic Engagement, and Chris Lowen, Executive Vice President, Regulatory. Welcome. You have 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Bonjour. Je m'appelle Tracy Sleto.
I'm Tracy Sleto, and I am the CEO of the Canada Energy Regulator. And today with me I have Genevieve Carr, who's a doctor in biology, and she is the Executive VP for Transparency and Strategic Engagement, and Chris Lowen, who's Executive VP Regulatory.
That I am on the unceded ancestral and traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation, who have lived on and cared for the land now known as Ottawa since time immemorial. Je vous remercie de me donner.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about the work of the CR within the context of your study on the Trans Mountain Pipeline extension.
Of the CER's mandate, how we assess energy infrastructure projects like TMX, the project's current regulatory status, our continued role alongside an Indigenous Advisory and Monitoring Committee. The CER's mandate is clear: to regulate energy infrastructure in a way that prevents harm and ensures the safe, reliable, competitive, and environmentally sustainable delivery of energy to Canada and the world. We oversee approximately 71,000 kilometers of federally regulated pipelines and 1,500 kilometers of power lines. Nous jouons un rôle économique important en ce qui...
We play an important economic role when it comes to pipeline tolls and also energy exports. The CR also has a mandate to give information on energy, and we provide data analysis to clarify decision-making and dialogue on energy in Canada. Our series of reports on the energy future looks at various scenarios that Canadians could face in the long term in a carbon-neutral world.
Makes a recommendation as to whether or not a certificate for a pipeline should be issued by the Governor and Council. It must consider several factors: safety, economic, environmental, and social. This was true in the case of TMX. TMX is a particularly large and complex project, and the CER strived at all times to ensure it demonstrated a commitment to strong, responsive, and inclusive regulatory practices and processes. The Governor and Council approved the project in June 2019, subject to 156 legally binding conditions, in addition to the regulatory requirements that apply to all companies regulated by the CER. Since then, we have been focused on ensuring the project was constructed safely and on verifying company compliance with regulatory requirements. The Commission of the CER issued the final authorization for TMX to operate on April 30th, 2024. This enabled the company to begin transporting product in the new line from its Edmonton terminal to its Westridge Marine Terminal. Notre rôle ne s'arrête pas maintenant que le construction.
A rule does not stop now that construction has finished. As a regulatory body during the whole life cycle of facilities, we will continue to ensure that this corporation respect rules, regulations, and established standards.
Economic regulator that oversees pipeline tolls. Tolls are the fees a pipeline company charges its customers to ship products, such as oil, on its pipeline. A company can only charge tolls that have been filed with the CER. The Commission approved preliminary interim tolls for the expanded Trans Mountain Pipeline system in November 2023. The next step for the Commission is the final interim tolls hearing that will continue throughout 2024 and into 2025, which will include a detailed cost review of the project. J'aimerais profiter de l'occasion pour souligner.
I would like to actually underline another key element of regulatory monitoring of this Trans Mountain project. When the Canadian government approved the project back in 2016, it also committed itself to set up an Indigenous Advisory and Monitoring Committee for this project.
Selected from among the 129 communities impacted by the project. Together, alongside the CER and 5 other federal government departments, the IAMC developed innovative approaches to Indigenous monitoring, project notification, the protection of sites of Indigenous significance, the new emergency management processes and protocols. Several of these improvements have since been incorporated into CER practices and regulatory requirements that apply to all companies. The CER will continue working with the IAMC throughout the pipeline's life cycle. Looking forward, the CER is committed to continual improvement as a national energy regulator, with an eye to building and maintaining trust and confidence in its work, advancing reconciliation and implementing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, enhancing Canada's global competitiveness through leadership in regulatory innovation and best practices, and preparing for the energy future. Je tiens à vous remercier de nouveau de m'avoir donné l'occasion de vous parler du travail de la Régie et de notre rôle à la...
Thank you once again for calling us here, and I'm ready to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your opening statements. And as a reminder, I use these cards. This is a 30-second warning. Red is that time's up, but I'll try not to interrupt you mid-sentence as we proceed. Thank you. We'll now go to Ms. Stubbs for 6 minutes. Go ahead, Ms. Stubbs.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Just in general, would you agree with the economic reality that natural resource development and oil and gas is the single leading private sector investor in the Canadian economy underpins affordability and the economy in every single community in this country?
Thank you for that question. I can certainly speak to, as our role is one of a safety and an economic...
Do you recognize as the head of the Canadian Energy Regulator, do you agree that natural resources and oil and gas in particular underpins the Canadian economy?
I think our role in terms of our regulatory
all facts and
mandate
stats
role...
show, of course, it's the driving factor behind economic development in Canada and closing the gap between the wealthy and the poor. And of course, as a representative of many Indigenous communities and people on whom responsible resource development, who rely on responsible resource development, it is of course the leading factor in Indigenous employment and pursuit of economic opportunities. I just have some general questions. How many people work at the Canadian Energy Regulator?
We have approximately 600 staff that work for the regulator.
Since 2015, how many projects have you recommended for approval or denial?
How many projects since 2015? I don't have that number at my fingertips at the moment, but we certainly can endeavor to have that back to you.
Thank you. We will follow up on that request. So there are 53 projects stuck in some way in federal review currently. Ms. Ludwig, you were vice president for 5 years at this Canadian Energy Regulator. Thank you for your service in the CEO since December 2023. Of course, the Canadian Energy Regulator is a fundamental and critical to every single Canadian, given the scope of its work. There are 53 projects stuck in approval, on which there's been no decision. 600 people work for the Canadian Energy Regulators. You've just confirmed. What's happened is a $5 trillion net outflow of investment from Canada into the United States every single year since 2015 and since the changes. And because of this government, it's a direct reversal. It's related to natural resources projects being abandoned or killed in Canada because the private sector can't see their way through the regulatory process and doesn't have a government that will back it on the back end. Because, of course, TMX was originally approved in 2016. And the court decision actually was that the Liberals failed in their Indigenous consultation on TMX. So I'm glad to hear that you have the Indigenous Advisory Group. But I guess I'm just asking if you think that sounds like a rate of success for the performance of the regulator.
Thank you for the questions and the observations. I certainly would observe that the 600 people that work at the Canada Energy Regulator are dedicated to their job of regulatory oversight. There's several decisions that would be undertaken in the context of that work.
Right, and as the head of the organization, I'm asking you, as the head of the organization, if you would consider 600 people working for an organization in, I would argue, the most important regulatory body in this country for a community, for our country, and for the affordable lives of all Canadians, which after 9 years have skyrocketed because of their inflationary spending and their policy agenda that drives up the cost of energy and essentials for every single Canadian, particularly rural, remote areas. I just have a hard time rationalizing, like, if you were to report to somebody as the boss of the organization, how it could be conceived that 53 projects stuck in nowhere land with 600 people is productive.
I think when we look at what the role of our regulator is and the role of the work of the 600 people at the CER, there's actually several aspects for our mandate, including an adjudicative mandate and the role of the commission in its decision-making processes.
Okay, great. So on that note, I have some questions. Could you explain, when you first deny the pipeline variance for the proponent, what changed to make you later approve it, since that was one of the delays which drive up costs? Second of all, you made 16 recommendations on TMX that fall outside of the scope. Your organization said that itself fall outside of the CER's regulatory mandate. So we have a body of 600 people, 53 projects on hold, the most important sector in the Canadian economy. And those 600 people can't get through the processes, but somehow you made 16 recommendations on TMX that added to the delay and are outside of the regulatory scope. That's an additional question. My other question is, since the Supreme Court indicted this government's failures on C-69, which, by the way, the Conservative opposition warned on every single issue, the way that the Supreme Court ruled, and then they just stuck some of their tweaking legislation into their budget implementation bill, how has that impacted your work in the Canadian Energy Regulator, which is a clear vacuum for your regulatory parameters since the Supreme Court of Canada decision? And what kind of guidance or insight have you been given by the government about your organization's scope and mandate as a result of their legislative changes to their mistakes in their C-69 bill that the Supreme Court of Canada and all 10 provincial and territorial leaders have indicted, which is the cornerstone of regulatory assessment for the most important sector in the Canadian economy, right, for affordable lives for all Canadians in every community?
Thank you for those questions. There were several there.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if I might just be able to clarify and confirm with you how you'd like me to address them. I heard a question around the reconsideration, a question specifically around those recommendations that were outside of the CER's mandate, and then one around C-69. Would that be the three?
Thank you. And because we're all stuck in the constraints of this ridiculous time, I do want to tell you, please do follow up with anything and all additional information afterwards if we run into the clock.
Sure.
And we have run into the clock. So thank you, Ms. Stubbs. Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Shifke for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for being here and for taking the time to answer our questions. My line of questioning is going to be revolving around what's important for my community of Vaudreuil-Soulanges. There will others in this room that will speak to the economic benefits, particularly for Alberta and British Columbia, from the construction of the pipeline or the expansion. There will be those that will speak to Indigenous partnerships and the share of the roughly $30-some-odd billion that was provided to Indigenous communities, Indigenous-led businesses that have benefited from it. My line of questioning is more so around the environment, and protection of the environment, as well as security. And I'll start off with the environment. We know that if you're going to transport oil, the most efficient way to do it is by pipeline, as opposed to rail. The stats show it's 2 times safer, which I'll get to in a second, but also over long distances, much more efficient. So we're going to see some significant savings there with regards to GHG emissions. But in addition to that, all of the emissions that are projected to be created by this pipeline are going and have already been captured into Canada's climate plan. So these aren't kind of an external, these are already factored in. So that's the good news, and I've shared that with my constituents. Question I have for you, above and beyond the fact that we're doing it in the most environmentally sustainable way in terms of GHGs, the fact that it's already factored into Canada's emissions target and plan, what other key tools have been put in place to ensure that this is, protects the environment in the best way possible?
Very much for that question. There are several aspects that I might highlight, but one in particular that I might want to shine a light on in the context of both this project and recent projects that have been regulated by the CER. Certainly the considerations around social, economic, environmental factors are key part of any review that the CER would undertake on its project reviews. and its focus on life cycle oversight, those same considerations remain true in our entire regulatory framework. But one element of the Trans Mountain project that I will highlight specifically, and I mentioned it in my opening remarks, was a quite innovative approach in the context of working with Indigenous peoples in a different way. So I mentioned the IAMCs, and in the context of Trans Mountain, working in partnership with those impacted communities along the route. And I mention this because it's actually benefited our regulatory framework across Canada, is really with an eye to having those partnerships be able to identify and take action on areas of concern that would have impact, both not only on the environment, but also in terms of cultural impacts, heritage resources, real implications in the long term in terms of how these natural resources and infrastructure projects operate. So I would say that's an innovative feature. That is something that we've not only continued to employ in the Trans Mountain context, but have adopted those best practices and are now incorporating them into our regulatory framework that would apply to companies that we regulate across the country.
Thank you for that. The second issue I want to address, obviously, is security. As you know, July 6, 2013 was a day that us in Quebec won't forget. 47 of our citizens, Quebecers, mothers and fathers, lost their lives, and half of the downtown core of Lac-Mégantic was destroyed. So from a safety perspective, can you comment on how this is the safest way of doing it, what the ratios are with regards to protection via rail versus pipeline? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Certainly, and appreciate both that sentiment and the questions. I may turn to my colleague, Mr. Lowen, in a minute to expound on this, but one of the things that I will mention, we talked a little bit about 600 people working at the regulator. I can tell you that each and every one of them go to work every day thinking about that safety mandate every day. The job of a regulator is to identify and prevent harm and that is associated with regulated activity that we work on, and so we have a dedicated staff that are focused on exactly that. So thinking through how to identify in the first instance those causes of harm, but how to prevent them is really key. And perhaps I might turn to my colleague who's responsible for our regulatory activities and specifically emergencies. Mr. Lowen.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you very much for the question, Mr. Shifke. The degree of regulatory oversight is proportional to a project's complexity and scale. And this is a very complex and very large project, perhaps the largest Canadian history, but definitely the largest for the CER. The larger and the more multifaceted projects are, the more monitoring and guidance we provide in order to make sure that the conditions for the project were followed. We also use a series of enforcement tools to ensure that companies are following the regulations and the standards that are set by the CER. And that includes everything from administrative monetary penalties to condition compliance, inspection officer orders, and safety orders. Safety is always our top priority and includes all workers, contractors on job sites. And there were somewhere in the neighborhood of 30,000 workers on this project over its lifespan. Quite a huge achievement. And the safety record from the CER's perspective was one that we always think we can do better, but we think in this case it was very good. We confidently enforce some of the strictest safety and environmental standards also in the world. So I'll just maybe just leave it at that.
Just one last question, because I think about 20 seconds left, Chair. If, based on the expertise that you have, if you had a choice between transporting oil by train or by pipeline, is it a question that, is it even close, I guess?
I certainly appreciate the question, and I think you'll appreciate my response in that our role is to stay focused on that safety record in terms of our regulated the oversight of our regulated infrastructure. And so I think it might be for others to comment on that choice, but certainly we're confident in the role that we have and the job that we do with respect to that oversight of pipelines.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shifke. Mr. Grand, welcome to committee. You have 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to be here. It's good to come to the Natural Resources Committee and again to see that Liberals are basically Conservatives when it comes to the energy and the environment. What my Liberal colleague has just said is absolutely scandalous because the Liberals have the aim to not actually hit their GHG targets, but rather to export as much oil as possible. So the argument that's being used is that they're saying we're going to have pipelines built and it'd be less dangerous by pipeline than by rail. And then we put the question to the regulatory body here, and it's a question that's really dishonest. Well, he's honest, but it's a dishonest question because if we want to transport tons of oil, is it better to use pipelines or rail? I've got a question. Would it not be safer to have energy safety by actually exporting less? Thank you very much for your question. It's a kind of market-related question, and it relates to our mandate, so I'll switch to English, if I may.
Around our role in terms of overseeing that activity is not one of a policy leadership role in terms of making those larger choices, and certainly there are market forces at play that I think are quite crucial. Part of our role, though, as Canada's energy regulator is with respect to our energy information mandate and the work that we do in terms of forecasting and modeling of various scenarios into the future. And so with respect to potential exports or net zero scenarios.
Je vais me permettre de vous interrompre.
I'm going to interrupt you. It's a bad habit I've got. I've understood that the mandate of the regulator is, amongst other things, to ensure the safety of the facilities, but you're incapable of telling me whether when transporting less oil there would be a lower risk of accidents. I've got my answer, and I understand that you cannot actually give me this answer, which is an obvious one. What I wanted to demonstrate was actually the dishonesty behind this question, showing that the question from my Liberal colleague has put you in a tough situation. We shouldn't do that with our guests. So I understand it's your role to ensure that once facilities are actually built, that the transport of energy is carried out in a safe way. The transport of this. So there's provincial notions, there's question of national interests related to safety here. So would it be true to state that your mandate could be to ensure transportation of the oil in the best environmentally safe way, even though this is the dirtiest oil in the world? Could that be your possible mandate?
Essentiellement, ma question.
Basically, this is my question. We've got the scientific data. Producing oil from the oil sands is a process that's highly polluting. There's lots of different processing phases. From an environmental point of view, it's extremely shocking. And it should not fall to Ottawa to decide this. So when the regulatory comes before the committee, and you're quite right, I'm not blaming you, but you're saying that your work is to...
We have a point of order, so I'll ask you to hold
Chair,
1 sec. Yes.
This is a federal committee dealing with federal issues in federal jurisdiction, dealing with crucial economic infrastructure regulated by these folks. They're actually not here to comment on development of resources that are provincial jurisdiction.
It's a point de débat, Monsieur.
Sorry, that's a point of debate, Chair. It's a point of debate.
Very strongly
C'est pas un point.
in respecting provincial jurisdiction, and I suggest that Quebecers share that view too.
Thank you, Ms. Stubbs. That's not a point of order. Monsieur Garan does have the time to ask his questions with the time allotted to him. So, Monsieur Garan, I know you know what the study is, and continue on with your questions. Thank you.
When it's time to threaten municipalities and to cut housing budgets, you don't mind that. But when I put relevant questions, that bothers Conservatives. It's hard to find the logic in all of that. I've basically given up on trying to find any logic in that. What I was trying to say is as follows. Albertan oil from the oil sands is the dirtiest form of oil. Chair, is everything okay? Is that enough now? So it's the dirtiest oil that's produced in the world, and that's not something that falls to Ottawa to decide. So when we invite you to come before the committee, I'd just like to clarify the question of your mandate. When we put questions to you about safety and the environmental aspect of the transport of energy, my question is the following. Is it possible for the federal regulator to ensure that we transport it in the most ecological and safest way possible, but we're transporting oil that's amongst the dirtiest produced in the world? Is it possible to square that circle within the context of your mandate? Thank you for your question.
Executive Officer of the Canada Energy Regulator. I really am here to speak about our mandate and role, and certainly with respect to how we conduct that activity and our focus on that safety and regulatory mandate. I'm certainly able to speak about how we do that and what motivates us and our priorities in that respect. But I think what you're asking is a question that is a much more policy related question that is for us certainly one
C'est
that we might
pas,
ask others to speak to.
C'est pas une question de politique.
It's not a public policy question. It's really related to transport, and that is why it's displeasing my colleagues here. We've got MPs from the governmental side who are saying we need to transport energy in a safe way, and we have to transport energy in an ecological way. And this is hiding two central issues when it comes to Trans Mountain, leaving aside the cost question, which is completely crazy. We can't go into that. But a safe aspect, you are safely transporting the dirtiest form of oil in the world. That was my first point. And then secondly, if we want to improve the question of safety with transport, transport less. That would be the first solution that needs to be considered when we're talking about ensuring our energy security and safety. There is no government MP nor any Conservative MP that tries to really shed light on all of this with the public.
Mr. Angus, we'll now proceed to you for 6 minutes. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. The reason we're studying TMX is twofold. One is this massive increase that's going to come from the pipeline does represent a major carbon bomb, which will make a mockery of the Liberals' promise to the global community on emissions cap. And the other is the $34 billion the Canadian taxpayers got stuck with. So I will focus on how we're going to get that money back. So you say that interim toll rates have been established. What are those interim toll rates now?
I'm happy to answer some of those specific questions, but partly what I will observe, and I do thank you for the question, is this is a matter before our commission right now. So with respect to our
I get
role,
that. That's why I was just asking what are the rates now, not what's going to be renegotiated, but what are the rates?
all right, and thank you. I may turn to my colleague, Mr. Lowen. He may have some of that information at his fingertips to be able to provide to you.
Oh, thank you very much for the question, Mr. Angus. There are fixed tolls and there are variable tolls right now. Right now, the variable toll is a component of a benchmark toll, which is about 58 cents per barrel. And the total benchmark toll is about $11.46 a barrel, which represents $10.88 plus 58 cents. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're trying to get at, or...
Well, I'm trying to figure out how much the public is on the hook for, because we were told first off that the cap on what the oil companies would be paid would be 22%, meaning 78% was out there. Was that the taxpayer? I'm looking at the Wildwood Nations report on the pipeline running through their area, and they say that 48% of the costs are recoverable in tolls. Which is less than half of the cost. So that would mean, I guess, unless the unicorns come down and cover the rest of the cost, the Canadian taxpayers. So are they correct that right now only 48% of those costs per barrel are recoverable?
Well, at this time, as Ms. Leto had already mentioned, this is an issue in front of our commission right now, and our role is in financial regulatory oversight. Includes evaluating the economic feasibility of a proposed pipeline, and then ensuring that tolls and tariffs are just and reasonable, and that they were necessary, and the costs were necessarily and reasonably incurred by the company.
Because we know that our oil company friends who are refusing to come to our committee have been saying that they think it's unfair that they're having to pay 48% of the cost while the public gets stiffed with 52%, and they want a better deal. But hopefully they'll come. We'll be asking them to come. But when I look at the Wildwood First Nations report, now you talk about your great Indigenous partnerships, and they say that this pipeline is in the heart of their territory. They state, quote, tolls that cover less than half of a project's cost cannot be found to be just nor reasonable, nor in the public interest. Approving this interim toll application would set a dangerous precedent by conflicting with the Canada Energy Regulatory Act and with guidelines from the NEB and the CER. And they would violate well-established principles for rate design, including cost of service recovery, fair return, revenue sufficiency, efficiency, and transparency. Do you think that that's a fair analysis of us being stiffed as a taxpayer for the other 52% of Imperial Oil's costs to run bitumen?
If I could answer, and thank you for that observation and question. And you're right to observe that the community in which you mentioned is an impacted community by the project and certainly involved in the Indigenous Advisory and Monitoring Committee work that we do, and we're very proud of that work. I will mention that the matter before the Commission right now is to establish those tolls, and so right now there is evidence on the record, including those of participants and interveners, and so for us, I think it's very important that we do respect that adjudicative process, and the matters that are before the Commission are with
I
respect
agree.
to tolls.
Would you be able to, do you have an idea when those tolls will be public, and would we be able to hear from you on that so that we have a sense whether or not we're getting ripped off as the public, Joe Q public?
The timing of the tolling matter is currently active before the Commission, and the process right now is we expect that to be occurring over the coming months and into 2025. There will be procedures and processes that would be allowing for that very public exchange, and a considerable amount of information has been filed on the record as part of that hearing process right now and publicly available.
Thank you. It was fascinating this morning. We learned that, if we had had the TMX pipeline, maybe that horrific tragedy in Lac-Mégantic might not have occurred. But the Lac-Mégantic disaster was oil from Dakota. It had nothing to do with what's coming out of Alberta. But yet the Liberals would pretend that we could, when we set up this pipeline, it's taking off the railway as opposed to increasing. So I would just want to ask you, because I read the TD financial report. I get up in the morning, go to the washroom, read my TD financial report. And it says, after a relatively weak year for Canada's oil producers, output growth in 2024 could amount to a significant 300 to 500K barrels per day, putting Canada in the running to be the largest source of global oil supply growth. So the Justin Trudeau government is leading the way. Would you say that this massive increase that's happening because of TMX means that it's not simply we're shifting from railway to pipeline, but we're adding capacity? Is that a fair analysis?
Thank you for the question. Certainly when the Commission, in the context of the deliberation on this project, it considered, again, we mentioned the social, economic, and environmental impacts of the project, and certainly an increase in capacity would have been part of what would have been considered by the Commission at that time. But the decision at that time was to proceed, and the context around what you're describing, I think in terms of global market impacts, is also something that need be considered in the context of supply and demand and pricing. There's a complex market in
300 to 500K barrels per day, and it says Trans Mountain is the biggest factor. That's not Charlie Angus saying that. That's the TD financial report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. We'll now proceed to our next speaker. We'll start with Ms. Stubbs before Mr. Patzer. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Just to our Bloc colleague, I would just certainly assure him that we Conservatives support the expanded production and exports of Canadian oil and gas to help lower global emissions and to bring powerful paychecks for our people in every community in this country. But we look forward.
Point of order, Chair. Point of order, Chair.
Against the Bloc leaders who pledged to support the Liberals.
Hold on, Ms. Stubbs. Sorry, we have a point of order from
Monsieur le Président, la collègue conservatrice.
Mr. Chair, the Conservative colleague is stepping on provincial jurisdiction. That's absolutely unacceptable. She's overstepping the mark.
Hey, colleagues.
Yeah, it's not provincial. I'm actually talking
Ms.
about the
Stubbs,
federal.
if I would just ask you to hold a second. Thank you, Mr. Guerin, for your point of order. Colleagues, if we could focus our time on asking questions and not getting into debate amongst each other with folks around the table.
Great,
That would be greatly appreciated. So I'm going to go back to you. So
Perfect.
go
Thank
ahead,
you,
Ms.
Chair.
Stubbs.
This is all, of course, part of the tangled web we weave when the Liberals first deceive, as they have on TMX and on energy, because they've been speaking out of both sides of their mouths. They've been eating the NDP and the Green voters for lunch. That's why you've seen this change. But of course, they've implemented the world's first oil and gas emissions cap, which is designed to stop production and to keep Canadian resources in the ground. Make no mistake, Canadian Conservatives support expanding the production and exports of Canadian natural resources for powerful paychecks for our people to help lower emissions globally. So just to get back on to these topics that we were touching on earlier. So it turns out we found out less than a third of the projects proposed since November 2015 have been approved by the Canadian energy regulators. So we should probably have follow-up conversations about whether or not that can reasonably be conceived of as a successful track record to Canadians. It's important to every single Canadian, every single community, especially Indigenous people who are most impacted by employment provided by natural resources and oil and gas development in particular. So if we could just get back to the pipeline variance decision, that was part of my other question. You know, of course, that a year ago the CER denied that application. That would have sped up completion of the project by 2 months and bring approximately $400 billion in additional revenue. Then the request was approved in January of 2024. This sort of uncertainty is, of course, a death knell to getting big projects built and sends negative signals to private sector investors. And the mess we're in is, of course, the government didn't take action when it should have and then unnecessarily bought this thing. So can you explain what changed in terms of your ultimate decision between last year, your denial that further delayed the project?
Thank you very much for that question. And just to confirm, you're speaking about one of the specific variance requests that would have come in the context of Trans Mountain last year. I will observe.
Sped up completion.
There were several adjudicative decisions that would have been taken both by the commission in the context of overseeing the construction of that project. So there were several decisions that would have been around leave to open or variances or various types of condition requirements that would have been met throughout not only the construction but ongoing into the operation of that pipeline. And so I might need a little more information into the specifics of the decision that you're speaking about, but in general, I believe what you're speaking about is the necessity for the regulator to be thinking about timely reviews and to ensure that those decisions are made transparently and openly. I can assure you that the Commission turns its attention to that to make those adjudicative decisions within its mandate, and there were several that would have been associated with the oversight of construction on this project, as there are with the oversight of construction on any project. So it's not just a matter of sort of one. I would say that there's several decisions that would have been taken, and they would have all been made with a focus and a commitment to be made in a timely manner, in an accessible manner, in a transparent manner, as is our mandate.
Without a doubt, clarity, consistency, and competitiveness in requirements for private sector proponents, the scope of the regulator, your duties, but most important is speeding up, not compromising diligence of review, but speeding up the timelines for final decisions. So can you comment then on what the impact has been in the massive vacuum created by the Liberals for regulatory reviews of these most important projects in this most important sector in the Canadian economy since the Supreme Court indicted the legislation that governs the scope of your work, and then they went back to the drawing board and threw in a couple of amendments in the Budget Implementation Act. And so has that delayed your work, waiting for the government while it delayed and dithered to actually take action on legislative clarity to remedy the problems in C-69 that they were warned about by the Conservative official opposition during the entire debate on C-69 as confirmed by the Supreme Court of Canada?
Thank you for that question. And in part, what I can confirm is that we haven't had a change to our legislative mandate. The Canadian Energy Regulator Act and the factors that we consider in the context of our work remain firm, and that work and our focus has been consistently applied in the context of both this project and that we oversee.
How can it make sense when those amendments that the government put into the Budget Act deal specifically with the scope and mandate and work of the regulator as it relates to C-69, your governing legislation that was only given royal assent in the summer? How can it actually be true that all of that dithering and delaying and the legislative and policy framework that literally provide the mandate for all of your work, how can it be true that the government's delays and ditherings and mistakes and failures have not impacted your organization's ability to
Thank
do your
you,
job?
Ms. Stubbs. Time is up, and maybe we'll have an opportunity to get to that question later. We'll now go to Ms. Lapointe for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
Regulators Market Snapshot report that was published in August shows a major increase in capacity due to the Trans Mountain expanded system, and that seems to be very specific to the West Coast. So can you describe for us what economic opportunities exist for Alberta and Canada in having that increased capacity to the West Coast in terms of diversifying exports beyond the United States?
Thank you very much for that question. I might speak to first, in the context of the decision that was made on this project specifically, those economic considerations would have been certainly factored into the public interest decision that was made and taken by the Governor and Council with respect to this project. You're also speaking to that broader market analysis and economic information. There's two aspects to that question I might highlight. One would be more of a policy mandate question, I think, in terms of the government's economic approach. But the other I'll mention in terms of our Canada Energy Regulator mandate around energy information and market supply. So you speak about our snapshots, which is a key part of our energy information mandate. We produce not only flagship reports like the Energy Futures Report, but also things like snapshots or those provincial and territorial profiles, some of which were just released last week. On that broader economic front, and certainly with an eye to thinking through from a forecasting perspective and with a net zero lens, we released our first ever net zero modeling in Energy Futures 2023 report last year. And it speaks to there some of those broad economic impacts that I think you're speaking about. I wouldn't be in a position to speak specifically about the kinds of things that you're referencing in the context of the direct lines of this project, but certainly we have plenty of information available around those broad economic forecasting and market impacts that we expect to occur, and specifically in the context around the scenarios of a net zero future. And we'd be pleased to provide that information as a follow-up.
So, taking into consideration the current global energy market disruptions, can you tell us how the TMX expansion will contribute to enhancing Canada's domestic energy supply?
Thank you very much. I think that likely in the context of the kind of information that you just referenced, those market snapshots would be certainly information that we would rely on, and those are all publicly available, including some of the work around the association around the outputs related with the broader energy market in Canada, and certainly in the context of economic opportunities. Again, I just might again speak to our role, and so with an energy information mandate, our role is to provide that analysis and that modeling, but we haven't that policy leadership role. In the context of a regulator, our role is very clear in terms of that safety mandate and that economic regulatory mandate. So I might look to colleagues at Natural Resources Canada to speak more about that broader economic policy that you're speaking of.
And in your opinion, how does the pipeline support future infrastructure developments aimed at improving energy storage, distribution, and grid reliability within Canada?
I would observe that, and thank you, I would observe that within our mandate and within our oversight role with this project, certainly, again, there are economic considerations that you've just mentioned, but I will observe that our work on this project, it was one of the most complex projects, and certainly a large project, one of the largest that the Canada Energy Regulator has overseen in terms of construction and operation. And I would say that the learnings that we've applied in terms of the improvements in our regulatory framework, as well as best practices and Indigenous engagement, certainly are helping to improve the transparency and the accessibility and predictability of the regulatory oversight system in Canada. And I think that those learnings would certainly benefit other projects in Canada as they're continuing to be proposed and developed.
And when you speak about the intensive and complex work that you've done around this project, can you, in your opinion, tell us how the pipeline expansion will influence job creation opportunities across the oil production industries? And also, I'm very interested in learning about the opportunities along the value chain.
Thank you. Some of those matters would have been considered in the context of, again, those economic considerations that the Commission would have turned its mind to in the adjudication of the project. There are also certainly information available in terms of the direct economic benefits that Indigenous communities have benefited from in the context of some of the conditions that were associated with the project. And there would be not only reporting around those conditions, but also transparency in terms of the regulatory compliance requirements that the company would have filed. And again, I think those broader questions around economic policy are likely better handled elsewhere.
Thank you, Ms. Lapointe. We'll now proceed. We're going to go to Mr. Morris. That's correct, Mr. Guerin. Okay. Thank you for sharing your time with Mr. Morris. Mr. Morris, you have 2.5 minutes. And colleagues, I think we can get one 2.5-minute round in for all parties. So we'll go with Mr. Morris.
Premièrement, merci Jean-Denis, c'est gentil.
First of all, thank you, Jean-Denis, that was very kind.
Back in 2016, the National Energy Board somehow found that this 1,150-kilometer pipeline was in Canada's public interest. Despite a long history, 85 spills leading up to that point, this was appealed 17 times, including by many First Nations. Since then, this government decided to buy the pipeline days after admitting we were in a climate emergency. The project has been referred by many environmental groups as a climate bomb for good reasons. Climate scientists tell us it's now or never if we want to limit warming below 1.5 degrees C. Instead, we just heard this pipeline will send nearly 900,000 barrels of diluted bitumen every day, an additional 84 million tons of carbon pollution every year. Now, a bit of a carbon accounting magic trick. It doesn't show up in our emission profile. It hangs out in other countries. At the same time, major health risks. The Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment tells us that if a tanker carrying 600,000 barrels even spills 2/3, only 0.5% reach shore, 25,000 people would need immediate evacuation, 105,000 if it's ignited. It's a financial disaster. The federal government, we've learned, is doing everything possible to create shell companies to hide how much money we've wasted. But the fact is that we've collectively wasted $34 billion, about $2,000 for every Canadian
Point
household
of order, Chair.
across
We
the
haven't
country.
collectively wasted that number. The official opposition has always opposed the government spending that money
So
on
colleagues, sorry, Mr. Morris, colleagues, I would just
Just a
remind
point of
everybody
order,
not
we
to use
to
point of
apply it
orders for
accurately.
your own debate. You can use that during your own time, ask questions, and provide your comments at that point. But Mr. Morris, I'm going to turn the clock back to you.
Thank you, Chair. As I was saying, the federal government bought the pipeline. Every Canadian across the country owns the pipeline. It's about a $2,000 cost to every Canadian household. With all this, turning to the CEO of the Canadian Energy Regulator, would you now say, yes or no, is this project in the public interest?
Thank you for the question. And the determination of the public interest with respect to this project was a determination made by the Governor and Council based on the recommendation of the Commission. And our role is to oversee that project in the context of our mandate.
Thank you, Ms. Sletto. I understand that. That was in 2016. Today, with the information we have now, is your view still that the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project is in the public interest? Yes or no?
That's not a determination that in my capacity as CEO, it's one appropriate for me to make. That is a decision that was made by the Governor and Council, and certainly not a matter before the Commission right now, nor would it be mine to
Thank you. So as the regulator, you're making clear then that you made the decision in 2016, but it's not your job to reassess that at any point to say, based on new information we've received, money wasted, potential for spills, emissions, the climate crisis, the regulator will never go back and say, was this still a good choice?
So, very quick, please, because time is up.
Our role is to ensure that the pipeline is constructed and operated safely, and that the regulatory requirements are met and applied in the context of that role. We have both that safety and economic regulatory mandate, and specifically that role with respect to tolls and tariffs adjudication is right now a matter before the Commission.
Thank you. We'll now proceed to Mr. Angus for 2.5.
Thank you. It's we're very pleased to have you here today, and this has been a good opening session for our Parliament. We're finally getting the true picture from my friends in the Liberals who have been talking this morning about the great economic investments, the great opportunities of massively increasing bitumen production and exporting it around the world. Because, you know, when we had Minister Wilkinson here, I asked him about your energy scenario for 2050, where you basically said we'd have pretty much close to the same amount of production in 2050 as we have today, maybe a little less. And I asked Minister Wilkinson, I said, well, it doesn't say much for your plan if energy stays the same. So then he said, oh, that's not right. We're going to make the CER do a new scenario. And so I looked at the unicorn and rainbows scenario. I loved it. You know, a multiple thousand-fold increase in direct air carbon capture, all the possible things. And now we got TMX with massive increases in bitumen production per day, per barrel. So I think Mr. Wilkinson was unfair making you do all that extra work. Would you say that your first scenario, that basically oil production is going to continue because Canada's a petro state and they got $34 billion from the taxpayer to make it happen? Your first scenario showed that oil production in Canada doesn't really decrease. even as the International Energy Agency says, major drops, even as the UN Climate Panel and their calls are saying we need to seriously drop, Canada now is leading the way in increasing global oil growth, leading the way. So in terms of your scenarios, is the unicorn and rainbow scenario, does it get blown out now by the fact that we finally got TMX up and running?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak about our energy futures work and those scenarios. And you're certainly right to observe that there's more than one. And so our work in Energy Futures 2023 really did provide a variety of scenarios with different assumptions so that we could be providing fact-based and neutral information to decision makers with respect to net zero.
Your great work. But that was also before TMX, and we saw the 300 to 500,000 barrels a day increases that are coming on stream. So I think that would you reassess?
Part, and again, thank you for the clarification. I might turn to my colleague, Dr. Carr, if you're interested in providing or receiving a little more information about the assumptions that went in or the assessments.
I'm wondering if it's time we just tossed the unicorn and rainbows promise to Minister Wilkinson and go out the window and just went back to reality. As we're hearing from our Liberal friends today.
Time is up, and maybe somebody else can ask that question, with your time, but I'll let Mr. Dreeshen, a couple of minutes for you, and then we'll finish off with our colleague. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, and I don't think I'll continue on that line, but what I would like to say, back in 1951, when the original Trans Mountain had been put together, it took 30 months to complete. When the approval had taken place for this project, 2017, it was also going to take 30 months. Which, had there not been as many delays, really would have had it completed prior to the onset of COVID, which again is one of the reasons why the cost increases have been part of this. So in a lot of ways, and you had there had been a discussion about the fact that you're going to have to deal with tolls and management of tolls. A lot of what these added costs have come because of regulatory issues that have slowed down the production. And so I'm curious, when companies come to you to speak about tolls, are they going to discuss that as being part of, and will you consider part of that in your adjudication? How much of it was really costs that they should have dealt with versus costs that have been put onto their side because of the regulatory system that we have?
Thank you for that question. There's two elements that I might just highlight. One is our conversations with regulated industry continually focus on ways that we can improve our regulatory oversight. We have various forums where we have an opportunity to do that, including a twice annual meeting with our regulated industry to speak about how to continually improve our timeliness and competitiveness of our approach to decision making. And I think the advice that we receive and the feedback that we received has been implemented in very practical ways, including with an initiative that right now is at the forefront of some of the work the regulator is doing. When you speak about how matters are considered in the context of the tolling matter on specifically Trans Mountain, I might again just lean on and really focus on the role and the important role of the Commission in considering those decisions that are before them at present. And so in the context, I think generally about your question and our commitment to ensuring that there's regulatory efficiency and effectiveness, I can assure you that that is one of our priorities in terms of as a regulator and wanting to demonstrate that regulatory excellence and a commitment to competitiveness, and to do so without a compromise to those other really key objectives around reconciliation, meaningfully advancing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and maintaining trust and confidence in the context of our work. All of this in a time when the energy sector is transitioning in a significant way, and as a regulator, we need to be ready to do that as well, and to ensure that we are ready to regulate in that new environment. It's a focus for us.
Ms. Leto, our time is up for that round, and we're going to finish off with Mr. Bruson for the final few minutes here, and then we'll conclude our meeting. Go ahead, Mr. Bruson.
Thank you. I only have a couple of minutes here, so I'm not going to be able to go very deep on these, but I did want to kind of set three things that I would love if you could provide more information to us. One is there's been a lot of conversation about the tolls and how do you set an appropriate toll rate. So if you would be able to provide us with more details as to the process, just because I keep hearing it coming up in different ways. So I think that would be helpful. The other piece is, I believe you mentioned the Indigenous Advisory Committee. And I would like more information if you could provide it on what the role is of the Indigenous Advisory Committee, just to get us a better sense of what the work is done. And the other question that's come up has been, you've talked a lot about safety, and if you can help direct us on spill safety and what the CER does. I know that there were a number of conditions specifically attached to TMX. So what do you do to actually make sure that those conditions are enforced? Maybe, because we have literally like 30 seconds left, if you can just give me a quick synopsis on that last point, which is there were conditions that were attached to TMX. What do you do to actually enforce them?
And thank you. Those are excellent themes. We'd be pleased to provide the committee with more information on those matters. When you speak about condition compliance, that is a major focus for us as a regulator, of course, to ensure that not only the specific conditions, there were 156 of them that were associated with this project, but all of those requirements that are part of our regulatory framework are adhered to. And so our compliance verification activities are not limited to those conditions, but certainly to the entire regulatory framework, and it's quite robust. And so our work in terms of our safety and conditions that are related to economic conditions or other Indigenous advisory and monitoring conditions, for example, our team works very closely with our IAMC partners and to ensure that those conditions are all met and satisfied in terms of their adjudicative role.
And have you actually to date found that they're in compliance?
We require compliance, and yes, we work very closely to ensure that that's the case. And so they're at various stages. The various conditions are at various stages of compliance because of their timeframes. And again, our oversight is for the life cycle of the project, not just for construction.
Thank you, Mr. Bruce, and thank you for the witnesses for joining us today and providing testimony. We have a point of order by Ms. Stubbs. Ms. Stubbs, go ahead on the point of order.
Thanks, Chair. I know you constantly have to school me on the rules and regulations around here, but I hope I'm doing my job on behalf of the people of Lakeland and Canadians. Thanks for your testimony today. Would you be willing to come back if we asked you after the adjudication round tolls to talk about some of these issues a little bit more, just for the importance of transparency to all Canadians?
We are happy to support the committee in whatever way would be best done.
Thank you.
That's not a point of order, but thank you, colleagues. We'll see you on
Point
Thursday.
of order.
Have a
They
great.
did agree.
Thank you, Mr. Angus, as well. Colleagues, we'll see you on Thursday. Have a great next few days and a great start to Wednesday, my apologies, at 4:30. So thank you once again to the witness for joining us. Meeting adjourned.